Hey, welcome everyone to the Nunkie Arms. I'm gonna. 32. This is pretty good. Now I'm looking a bit washed out, aren't I? Yeah. Good. I'll give it a few minutes. Allow people to gather a bit more. Glad to see everyone. Yeah, look at this: Long Island, New York, Wakefield, Oxford, Stafford, Powys. Brilliant. I have one thing I've been doing the last week or so. Theatres and venues are at last beginning to feel a bit more optimistic about the autumn. So I've been setting up a tour for the autumn. And so far I have the following bookings made. Now I'll update the website in a week or so, or maybe in a month or so with the exact dates. But I'll be in Salford, Southport, Poole, Sheffield, Peterborough, that's a new one for me, Scarborough, another new one for me, Cambridge, Shrewsbury, Halifax, Farsley, that's another new one for me. That's kind of near Bradford. Leicester, Newcastle, Edinburgh, Innerpeffray, which is in the middle of nowhere in Scotland, Burnham, which is another new one for me, which again is kind of rural Scotland, I think. I'll be near Ipswich at Otley Hall. I'll be in Bath. I'll be in Bedford, and I'll be in London. And they're the only ones that are confirmed. Hopefully, I'll also be in Preston, Glasgow, Canterbury, and several others as well. So things are looking up for that. Liverpool, I'm hoping to kind of organise one in as well. So yeah, so hopefully, all things going well, the roadmap being accurate and so on, in the autumn, who knows what kind of distancing there'll be involved and so on, I don't know, but at least there'll be some live theatre, I think. So yes, well, the Nunkie Arms, here we are. I don't know, I'm on London Pride at the moment. I've got a selection of other beers, but London Pride, to go well with the story that has been, this is the people's choice. I did referenda on Facebook and on Twitter, and in both, overwhelmingly, I gave a choice of three stories. The Crystal Egg by H.G. Wells, for which London Pride would have been suitable as well, N by Arthur Machen, or Monkeys by E.F. Benson. And the people went with the choice that I myself would have made, N by Arthur Machen. In the description of this live event, hopefully, you'll see some links to things that are coming up. Tomorrow night, in association with the Victor Wind Museum of Curiosities, I am performing Canon Albrecht's Scrapbook by M.R. James on Zoom. That's at 9 o'clock, and you can get tickets. I think it's pay what you like, in fact, but you got to buy a ticket from the link that I provided in the description for this video. The next thing that I'm doing under my own steam is on the 23rd of April, a reading of The Fenstanton Witch, which is N.R. James's unfinished, posthumously published ghost story. It was only really rediscovered and published in 1985 by Rosemary Pardo, who is the great doyenne of M.R. James studies in her magazine Ghosts and Scholars. So I discovered that means it's theoretically still in copyright, and so I've been trying to get in touch with the M.R. James estate to get permission to that. But I think that they're generally quite relaxed about granting such permissions. So that's going to be on the 23rd. Again, there's a link to pay what you can on Eventbrite for that. The other link I've put is, well, I can tell that some of you, half of you aren't listening to what I'm saying because you're admiring my hoodie. I mean, it's a nice, it's a simple black. Well, it's not a simple black hoodie. Look what's on the back. It's a Nunkie hoodie. You can get these hoodies, you can get t-shirts with all your favorite Nunkie shows emblazoned on the back. All 12, no, all, I can't remember exactly how many. Anyway, there's a great variety available, variety of sizes, variety of colors, variety of styles. Skullprint.co.uk is the place to look. But again, I've put the link there. With summer coming, with we're all going to meet out, bubbles outdoors and so on. You need a nice t-shirt. Who's here? Nottingham. Oh, there we are. It's Andrew Manning. Yeah, he's a great buyer of t-shirts already. Yeah, he's got a Cat Magnus t-shirt. The ultimate is the Mezzotint hoodie. Now, this is a hoodie with a zip at the front. You can get a hoodie without a zip at the front, with the design on the front. And you can imagine how frightening the Mezzotint hoodie is when the hood is up. I haven't yet got one of those myself, but I keep meaning to. Now, for those of you who and there are, I think there are 20 human beings on this planet who this might be of interest to. Those of you who followed T.S. Eliphant's recital throughout Lent of Dante's Inferno, at the moment there is a single T-shirt in existence celebrating that fact, with the logo "I have been through hell with T.S. Eliphant" and a picture of T.S. Eliphant. If you're interested in one of those, then email me, and I'll see what I can do. I think there are a few of you out there who might be interested in that. So what else? Okay, so yeah, hey, 57 people. This is great. Thank you for coming. I hope you've all got drinks. I've also got a pub snack that I'll probably have later on. Yeah, so N by Arthur Machen. I did it before. I did it about a year ago, and I've done it live a couple of times. And it's a favourite story, but it's kind of, Arthur Machen is he's a bit of a niche kind of taste, and it's not one that much as I'd like to, it's not one that I've ever committed to memory and thought of, have dared to kind of take on the road, because I just feared that not enough people would turn up. But one of the best reads I've had this year has been this book. It's called British Weird, Selected Short Fiction, 1893 to 1937, edited by James Machen. James Machen, he's also the editor of the magazine of the Friends of Arthur Machen. It's a society that's really worth joining for the publications they do, and they have a yearly get together and kind of bean feast and book auction. But it's a very interesting society. And this book, British Weird, is a really excellent collection of, as it says, weird fiction by British authors. So I've used it as a source for quite a lot of the behind closed doors stories that I've done. You'll find well-known stuff in here, like The Willows by Algernon Blackwood, Caterpillars by E.F. Benson, which I haven't done yet, but it's so grim, I kind of keep shying away from doing that. I did Man Size in Marble by Edith Nesbit, is one of kind of the best known ones. I've done that, but there's other very ones that I hadn't come across before, or I'd only heard of. Randall's Round by Eleanor Scott, which you can find on the YouTube channel. And then there's some very weird ones. I mean, there's a brilliant one by John Buchan, which I'd never heard of, called No Man's Land. And then there's a weird one called The Lost Keep. And then there's a mad one called Mappa Mundi by Mary Butts. Mary Butts, who wrote one of the first articles in praise of M.R. James in the 1930s, when he was still alive, I think. This is really worth getting hold of. And N by Arthur Machen. This is one of the few places you can find N by Arthur Machen in an affordable paperback book. Get it, it's really good. Anyway, we're going to read N by Arthur Machen. I should say we will have a comfort break halfway through. I suspect I'll need that. They were talking about old days and old ways and all the changes that have come on London in the last weary years. A party of three men, Perrott and Arnold and Harless, gathered round a blazing fire in Perrott's rooms in Mitre Place. The rooms were on the second floor, and from the front windows you could see the elms in the inn garden where the rooks used to build before the war. Within, the large low parlour was softly carpeted from wall to wall, and the winter night, with a bitter dry wind rising and moaning even in the heart of London, was shut out by thick crimson curtains. The armchairs on which the three sat were of the sort that Mr. Pickwick sits on forever in his frontispiece. The finest wax fruit I ever saw, Arnold was saying, was in a window in the King's Cross Road. And so they'd wander along, talking about the old-fashioned rather than the old. And on this winter night of the cold wind, they lingered on the London streets of 40, 45, 55 years ago. One of them dilated on Bloomsbury. There was that high-vaulted church of a strange sect, he recalled, where a wailing voice would suddenly rise up in incantation while the smoke of incense fumed about a solemn rite. And another church where Christine Rossetti had bowed her head. Those dim squares where no one ever seemed to walk, and the leaves of the trees were dark with smoke and soot. Yeah, I remember one spring long ago, said Perrott, when they were the brightest green I ever saw, those trees, in Bloomsbury Square. They worked their way down Fetter Lane and lamented Dryden's house, which had been pulled down in 87. And then they lingered for a while on the site of Clifford's Inn, like walking into the 17th century, said Perrott. And at last they made it onto the Strand. Ah, yes, they say it was the finest street in Europe, said Harless. Well, it was in a sense, said Perrott. Not in the obvious sense. It wasn't beautiful. It was of all ages and all sizes and heights and styles. Now, a unique enchantment of a street it was, an incantation itself, full of words that meant nothing to the uninitiated. And then a sort of litany followed. The shop of pale puddings, where little Davy Copperfield might have bought his dinner. Chocolates as in Spain, opposite Charing Cross. Nuts bookshop near the Welsh mutton butchers, where the street was narrow. And the flicker of those old yellow gas lamps when the wind blew up the street and the people were packing into that passage that led to the Lyceum pit. Perrott murmured a few verses from "O plump head waiter at the Cock" and began to make the punch. Matters were brought forth from cupboards at the dark end of the room, rum from the Jamaica coffee house, spices in blue china boxes, one or two old bottles containing secret essences. The kettle was boiled, and after a due interval, glasses were filled, and the three men sat round the fire, drinking and sipping with grateful hearts. Now, let it be noted that the glasses in question held no great quantity of liquor, and nothing injurious to the clearness of those three heads is to be inferred when it is said that between the third and fourth filling, the talk drew away from central London and began to drift farther afield into stranger, less well-known territories. Perrott began it by tracing a curious passage he once made northward into the dark labyrinth of Clare Market, under arches and by alleys, until he came into the Great Queen Street near the Freemasons' Tavern. Arnold then took up the tale, drifting into Holborn by Whetstones Park and going astray a little to visit Kingsgate Street until he finally reached Tybalt's Road. And here they lingered to consider those curiously decorated leaden water cisterns that were once to be seen in the areas of a few of the older houses, and to speculate on the legend that an ancient galleried inn had survived until quite recently at the back of the road. Then northward and eastward up Gray's Inn Road, crossing the King's Cross Road and going up the hill. And here, said Arnold, we have left the known world behind us. said Perrott. You know, that it sounds like awful rot, but it's true. At least it is as far as I'm concerned. I don't think I ever went beyond Holborn Town Hall. On foot, I mean. Of course, I've driven in a hansom cab to King's Cross, and I once went to the military tournament when it was in Islington, but I don't remember how I got there. Harless said that he'd been brought up in North London, but much further north, Stoke Newington way. Ah, yes, said Perrott. Yeah, I knew a fellow who knew all about Stoke Newington. At least he ought to have known about it. He was a Poe enthusiast, and he wanted to find out whether the school where Poe had boarded as a little boy was still standing. He spoke of certain survivals of the Stoke Newington that Poe writes about in William Wilson, you know, the dreamy village, the misty trees, the old rambling red brick houses standing in their gardens with high walls all about them. He went there a few times, to Stoke Newington, I mean, and the odd thing is that, well, he didn't seem to know whether the old school was still there or not, or whether he'd even seen it. Oh, yeah, he'd gone so far as to interview the vicar. He could describe the old church in some detail, but he could never make up his mind whether he'd seen Poe's school. I said to him, surely you know one way or the other. You either saw it or you didn't. There can't be any doubt about the matter, but, you know, we could never get to positive or negative. He talked like a man who'd gone into a mist and couldn't speak with any certainty of what he'd seen. And that reminds me, actually, long after my talk with Hare, sorry, that was the name of the Poe enthusiast, a cousin of mine came up to town to see about the affairs of an aunt of his who died somewhere up Stoke Newington way. He called here one evening. We'd not seen each other for years. And he was saying, truly enough, I'm sure, how little the average Londoner actually knew of London, you know, when you took him off his beaten track. For example, he said, have you ever been to Stoke Newington? Well, I had to confess that I'd never had any reason to go. Exactly, he said. And I don't suppose you've even heard of Cannon's Park. Well, I confessed ignorance again. And he said that it was extraordinary that such a beautiful place within 4 or 5 miles of the centre of the city seemed absolutely unknown by 9 Londoners out of 10. No, sorry, there's no such place. Harless broke in. Oh, I know every inch of that neighbourhood. I lived there till I was 16. There's a part of Stoke Newington called Cannon's Park, but it's not a park. It's just a builder's name. It's nothing like a park. It's just a lot of streets. Some decent shops, I think, but there's nothing beautiful about it. Well, my cousin said it was the most amazing place he'd ever seen. Not a bit like other London parks, he said. You go in through this gateway, I remember him saying, and it was like finding yourself in another country. Trees that looked like they'd been brought from the end of the world. Nothing else like them in England, he said. Deep hollows with streams running down from the rocks, lawns all purple and gold with flowers, golden lilies, I remember he said, towering up into the trees, and here and there little summer houses and temples, like a view in China, he said. No, said Harless, no such place. And anyway, it all sounds a bit flowery, doesn't it? No, there used to be 1 or 2 big, well-kept gardens up at Stoke Newington. And I suppose he strolled into one of them by mistake and got a bit carried away. Well, it's possible, I suppose, said Perrott. He wasn't that sort, you know. He was a farmer, Somerset man. Well, I can tell you, there's no place like that in Stoke Newington. To Harless, of course, these once familiar regions were common and uninteresting, and he couldn't revisit them in talk with any glow of feeling. The other two, meanwhile, held them unfriendly and remote, as if one were to discourse of Arctic explorations and lands of everlasting darkness. And so they returned, with some relief, to their familiar hunting grounds. But there was something in this tale of the marvellous suburban park that remained with Arnold and eventually sent him to the remote north of the story. Because as he was meditating on this vague attraction, he chanced one day to light on a shabby brown book on his shelves. He gathered it some time ago from a stall in Farringdon Street, and he'd scarcely looked at it before. It was called A London Walk, Meditations in the Streets of the Metropolis, and it was dated 1853. Now, the author was the Reverend Thomas Hampole, and the book consisted for the most part of moral reflections, the kind of things that are expected from a pious and amiable clergyman in the middle of the 19th century, when people still like to hear sermons from stones and be taught that there were gloomy reflections to be drawn from almost everything. And so the Reverend Hampole had stalked the London streets with a moralizing and monitory eye. He saw Regent Street in its early splendor, and he thought of the ruins of Rome. He preached on the text of solitude in a multitude as he viewed what he called the teeming myriads along the Strand. And he allowed a desolate, half-ruined house in Chancery to suggest thoughts of the happy Christmas parties that had once thoughtlessly revelled behind the crumbling walls and broken windows. But you see, here and there, he became less obvious and perhaps more really profitable. For example, there's a passage, it's already been quoted, I think, by a modern author, which it seems curious enough. I'm going to read it to you now. Has it ever been your fortune, courteous reader, Mr. Hampole inquires, to rise in the earliest dawning of a summer day, ere yet the radiant beams of the sun have done more than touch with light the domes and spires of the great city? If this has been your lot, have you not observed that magic powers have apparently been at work? The accustomed scene has lost its familiar appearance. The houses which you have passed daily, it may be for years, as you have issued forth on your business or your pleasure, now seem as if you beheld them for the first time. They have suffered a mysterious change into something rich and strange. They have become magical habitations, supernal dwellings, more desirable to the eye than the fabled pleasure dome of the Eastern potentate, or the bejewelled hall built by the genie for Aladdin in the Arabian tale. Now, there's a good deal more in the same vein. And then just when you're expecting the obvious warning about putting trust in appearances, it becomes really very odd. Some have declared, says Hampole, that it lies within our own choice to gaze continually upon a world of equal or even greater wonder and beauty. It is said by these that the experiments of the alchemists of the Dark Ages are in fact related not to the transmutation of metals, but to the transmutation of the entire universe. This method, or art, or science, or whatever we choose to call it, supposing it to exist or to have ever existed, is simply concerned to restore the delights of the primal paradise, to enable men, if they will, to inhabit a world of joy and splendor. It is perhaps possible that there is such an experiment and that there are some who have made it. I'm aware that these speculations may strike the reader as both singular and perhaps chimerical. Still, we are bound to be seekers of the truth, veritas contra mundum, and I'm strengthened in my belief that there is at least some foundation for the strange theories at which I've hinted by an experience that befell me in the early days of my ministry. Soon after I had been admitted to priest's orders, I spent some months living with relations in Kensington. A college friend of mine, I will call him the Reverend S., was a curate in a suburb of the north of London, Stoke Newington. I called on S one day at his lodgings and found him in a state of some perturbation. He was threatened, it seemed, with an affection of the lungs, and his doctor was insistent that he leave London and spend the winter in the more genial climate of Devonshire. My friend was very willing to act on this advice, but he did not wish to resign his curacy, in which he was both happy and, he trusted, useful. And so, on hearing this, I at once proffered my services, telling him that if his vicar approved, I should be happy to do his duty till the end of the ensuing March, or even later, if the physicians considered a longer stay in the south advisable. S was overjoyed. He took me at once to see the vicar, the fitting inquiries were made, and I entered on my contemporary duties in the course of a fortnight. It was during this brief ministry that I became acquainted with a very singular person, who I shall call Glanville. Glanville was a regular attendant at our services, and in the course of my duty, I called on him in his home and expressed my gratification at his evident attachment to the liturgy of the Church of England. He replied with due politeness, and he asked me to sit down and partake with him of the soothing cup. And we soon found ourselves engaged in conversation. Now, I discovered early on that he was conversant with the reveries of the German theosophist Machen and the later works of his English disciple William Law, and it was clear that he looked on these labyrinths of mystical theology with a friendly eye. He was a middle-aged man, spare of habit and of dark complexion, and his face was illuminated in a very impressive manner as he discussed the speculations which had evidently occupied his thoughts for many years. Now, based as these theories were on the doctrines of Law and Bayman, they struck me as of an extremely fantastic, I would even say fabulous nature. But I confess that I did listen with considerable interest, while making it clear that as a minister of the Church of England, I was far from giving my assent to the propositions which were placed before me. I mean, they were not, it is true, manifestly and certainly opposed to orthodox belief, but they were assuredly strange, and as such I thought to be received with salutary caution. An example: Glanville often dwelt on a consequence not generally acknowledged of the fall of man. When man yielded, he would say, to the mysterious temptation intimated by the figurative language of Holy Writ, the universe, originally fluid and the servant of his spirit, became solid and crashed down upon him, overwhelming him beneath its weight and its dead mass. Well, I requested him to furnish me with more light on this extraordinary belief, and I found that in his opinion, that which we now regard as stubborn matter was primarily, to use his singular phraseology, the heavenly chaos, a soft and ductile substance which could be moulded by the imagination of uncorrupted man into whatever forms he chose it to assume. Strange as it may seem, he added, the wild inventions, as we consider them, of the Arabian tales give us some notion of the powers of the Homo promoplastus. The prosperous city becomes a lake. The carpet transports us in an instant of time from one end of the earth to the other. The palace rises at a word from nothingness. Magic, we call all this, and we deride the possibility of such feats. But this magic of the East is but a confused and fragmentary recollection of operations which were of the first nature of man and of the fiat which was then entrusted to him. Well, as I have remarked, I listened to this and similar expositions with some considerable interest, and I could not but feel that such opinions were in many respects more in accord with the doctrine I had undertaken to expound than much of the teaching of the philosophers of the day, which seemed to exalt rationalism at the expense of reason, as that divine faculty was exhibited by Coleridge. Still, when I assented, I made it clear to Glanville that my assent was qualified by my firm adherence to the principles which I had solemnly professed at my ordination. Well, the months went by in the peaceful performance of my office, and then in early March I received a letter from S, who informed me that he had greatly benefited by the air of Torquay, and that his doctors had assured him that he need no longer hesitate to resume his duties. Consequently, he proposed to return at once, and after warmly expressed thanks for my extreme kindness, as he called it, he announced his wish to perform his part in the church service the following Sunday. Accordingly, I paid my final visits to those of the parishioners with whom I had more particularly associated, reserving my call on Mr. Glanville for the last day of my residence in Stoke Newington. I mean, he was sorry, I think, to hear of my impending departure, and he told me that he would remember our conversations with much pleasure. But I, too, am leaving Stoke Newington, he said. Early next week, I sail for the East, where my stay may be prolonged. Well, after mutual expressions of polite regret, I rose from my chair and I was about to make my farewells when I observed that Glanville was gazing at me with a fixed and singular regard. "One moment," he said, and he beckoned me to the window where he was standing. "I want to show you the view. I don't think you've seen it." Well, his suggestion struck me as peculiar, to say the least. I mean, I was, of course, familiar with the street in which Glanville resided, as he himself must have been aware. I was hesitating, hardly knowing whether to comply with his request or to treat it as a piece of pleasantry, when it struck me that his window might possibly afford a distant view of St. Paul's, and so I stepped to his side and waited for him to indicate the scene that he wished me to admire. His features still wore the odd expression that I've already remarked. "Now," he said, "look out and tell me what you see." Well, still bewildered, I looked through the window and saw exactly what I'd expected. A terrace of neatly designed residences separated from the highway by a parterre. A road passing to the right of the terrace gave a view of streets and crescents of more recent construction, I suppose of some degree of elegance, but in the whole of the spectacle I saw nothing to warrant any particular attention, and in a more or less jocular manner I said as much to Glanville. By way of reply, he touched me lightly with his fingertips on the shoulder and said, "Look again." I did so, and for a moment my heart stood still, and I gasped for breath. Before me, in place of the familiar structures, there was disclosed a panorama of astounding beauty. In deep dells, bowered by overhanging trees, bloomed flowers such as only dreams can show. Deep purples that seemed to glow with a hidden radiance, like precious stones, roses alive with light. Tall lilies that were as beaten gold. I saw well-shaded walks that went down to green hollows, bordered by thyme, and here and there the grassy eminence above and the bubbling well below were crowned with architecture of fantastic beauty, which seemed to speak of fairyland itself. I might almost say that my soul was ravished by the spectacle displayed before me. I was possessed by a degree of rapture and delight such as I have never experienced. A sense of beatitude pervaded my whole being, and I uttered an inarticulate cry of joy and wonder. And then, under an influence of a swift revulsion of terror, which even now I cannot explain it, I turned and rushed from that room and from that house without one word of comment or farewell to the extraordinary man who had done I knew not what. In great perturbation and confusion of mind, I made my way into the street And needless to say, no trace of the phantasmagoria remained. The terrace was as I'd always seen it, and the newer buildings beyond stood as before in their neat, unostentatious order. Where I had seen valleys embowered in green leafage, there were now boughs bare and black, scarcely showing so much as a single bud. I walked hurriedly to my lodgings, sincerely glad to think that I was leaving the neighbourhood on the following day. And I may say that up until the present moment, I have never revisited Stoke Newington. Some months later, however, I encountered my friend S, and under cover of asking about the affairs of the parish, I inquired after Mr. Glanville. It seemed that he had indeed left the neighbourhood within a few days of my own departure, but he had not confided his destination or his plans for the future to anyone in the parish. My acquaintance with him, said S, was only of the slightest, and I do not think that he made any friends in the locality, although he had resided in Stoke Newington for more than 5 years. It is now some 15 years since this most strange experience befell me. And during that period, I have heard nothing of Mr. Glanville. Whether he is still alive in the distant Orient, or whether he is dead, I am completely ignorant. Now, I think that's a good place to have a little break, a comfort break. Fill your glasses. We'll reconvene in about, I don't know, maybe 5 minutes. I'm going to stretch my legs, perhaps visit the comfort station, and I'll see you in a bit. All right. I'm going to leave it running, but yeah. I would like to now recite a poem that I believe has some kind of synergy with the story that Mr. Robert has been reading to you. The author of this poem is in fact referenced in Arthur Machen's story N, although in Mr. Roberts' edited version of it, he does not appear. The author is Thomas Traherne, and the poem is entitled Walking. To walk abroad is, not with eyes, but thoughts, the fields to see and prize. Else may the silent feet, like logs of wood, move up and down and see no good, nor joy, nor glory meet. Even carts and wheels their place do change, but cannot see, though very strange, the glory that is by. Dead puppets may move in the bright and glorious day, yet not behold the sky. And are not men than they more blind, who having eyes yet never find the bliss in which they move? Like statues dead, they up and down are carried, yet never see, nor love. To walk is by a thought to go, to move in spirit to and fro, to mind the good we see, to taste the sweet, observing all the things we meet, how choice and rich they be, to note the beauty of the day, and golden fields of corn survey, admire each pretty flower with its sweet smell, to praise their Maker and to tell the marks of his great power, to fly abroad like active bees among the hedges and the trees, to cull the dew that lies on every blade, from every blossom, till we laid our minds as they their thighs. Observe those rich and glorious things, the rivers, meadows, woods, and springs, the fructifying sun, to note from far the rising of each twinkling star, for us his race to run. A little child these well perceives, who, tumbling in green grass and leaves, may rich as kings be thought. But there's a sight which perfect manhood may delight, to which we shall be brought. While in those pleasant paths we talk, 'tis that towards which at last we walk. For we may by degrees wisely proceed, pleasures of love and praise to heed, from viewing herbs and trees. Sorry, sorry to leave you alone so long. I think I'm gonna have a, I'll tell you what, I enjoyed this last time I did this. It's rather strong. 1698, Shepherd Neame, Kentish strong ale. I'm gonna have a Kentish strong ale. What's been happening? Ooh. Oh, yeah. Oh, everything's well. So we're more than halfway through the story, but that seemed like a good place to have a break. How are we getting on? Previously on Anne by Arthur Machen, the Reverend Hampole had a strange vision out of a bedsit in Stoke Newington. And he'd written an account of it, which was read of in a book by Arnold, one of the three men we met at the beginning. Now, Arnold was generally known as an idle man. As he confessed himself, he hardly knew what the inside of an office looked like, but he was laborious in his idleness, and he was always ready to take pains over anything in which he was interested. And he was very much interested in this Cannons Park business. He felt sure that there was some kind of a link between Mr. Hampole's story and the experience of Perrott's cousin. So one day he made his way to Stoke Newington. He found Cannons Park without any trouble at all. And it was pretty well as Harless had described it. It was a neighbourhood laid out in the 1820s for city men of tolerable incomes. I mean, some of the houses remained, and there was an attractive row of old-fashioned shops. But on all the territory, modernism had delivered its assault. You know, the larger houses had been made into maisonettes, and everywhere there were blocks of flats in wicked red brick. Opposite Cannons Park, where Mr. Glanville's house must have stood, there was a technical college. Next to that was a school of economics. I mean, both buildings curdled the blood, and it looked as if Mr. H.G. Wells's worst dreams had indeed come true. And in none of this, of course, could Arnold see anything to his purpose. In Mr. Hampole's day, Cannons Park may have been tolerably pleasant. It was now in the process of becoming intolerably unpleasant. But even at its best, you see, there could never have been anything to suggest the wonderful vision which the clergyman had seen from Glanville's window. And the suburban gardens, however well kept, could not explain the rhapsodies of Perrott's cousin. But Arnold didn't give up. He beat the coverts of Stoke Newington and dived into pubs hoping to meet talkative old men who might remember their father's stories. And he found a few, because although London has always been a place of restless migratory tribes and shifting populations now more than ever, yet there still do remain in many places, particularly in the remoter northern suburbs, an old fixed element which can go back in memory sometimes for 100, even 150 years. And in a venerable old tavern, it would have been misleading to have called it a pub, on the borders of Cannons Park itself, Arnold found an ancient circle that gathered nightly for an hour or two in a snug, if dingy parlour. They were small tradesmen of the neighbourhood, and they talked of their business and the changes that they'd seen, you know, the curse of multiple shops and the poor stuff sold in them. Now, Arnold made several visits, and he edged into the conversation by degrees. He bought the odd round of drinks. He told them that he was thinking of settling in the neighbourhood, said he'd heard that Cannons Park was a quiet part off the main track. There was something in that, said one old man who'd accepted half a pint. You don't get very much traffic there, it's true. No trams or buses or motor coaches, but they're pulling it all to pieces, you see. Building new blocks of flats every few months. I mean, of course, that might suit you, sir. Very popular, these flats are with money people. Most economical, they tell me. But, you know, I've always liked a house of my own myself. I'll tell you one way a flat is economical, Mr. Potter, said another in the party. If you're fond of the wireless, you can save the price and the license. You'll hear the wireless on the floor above and the floor below, and one or two more when I got the windows open of a summer evening. Very true, Mr. Betts. That's very true. Still, I must say, I'm rather partial to the wireless myself. I like to listen to a cheerful tune, at tea time. Don't tell me, Mr. Potter, that you like that jazz, as they call it. Well, I must confess, Mr. Betts. And so forth and so forth. I mean, it became evident that there were modernists even here. And Arnold could have sworn that he heard the term hot blues distinctly uttered. He forced another half pint upon his neighbour and tried again. What? So you wouldn't recommend Cannon's Park as a desirable residence? Oh, well, no, sir. No, not to a gentleman who wants quiet. I shouldn't. I mean, it was certainly quiet enough in former days, but, well, there's quiet and there's quiet, isn't there? And with that, a distinct stillness fell upon the party. There was always something about the place I didn't altogether like, his friend said at last. I'm not sure I can say why. What was it, some tale of a murder there a long time ago? What was it, a man what killed himself and was buried at the crossroads with a stake through his heart? I never heard that, said Mr. Batts, but I did hear my father say that there was a lot of fever about there formerly. I think you're both wide of the mark there, gentlemen, if you'll excuse my saying so. This was from an elderly man in the corner who'd said very little hitherto. I wouldn't say as Cannon's Park had a bad name exactly, but there was something about it that people didn't like. Fought shy of, you might say. I mean, it's a long time ago, of course, but I think it was that lunatic asylum put people off Cannon's Park. You know where it was, don't you? That big house right in the middle of the park, remember? Been empty years and years. Where Empress Mansions is now. Himalaya House, it was called. In the first place, it was built onto an old farmhouse by a rich gentleman from India. And when he died, his relations sold the property to a doctor, and he turned it into a madhouse. And as I said, I think people didn't much like the idea of it. Those places weren't so well looked after as they are now. And well, some very unpleasant stories got about. I'm not sure if, in fact, the doctor didn't get himself mixed up in a lawsuit over a gentleman who'd been shut up in Himalaya House by his relations for years and as sensible as you and me all the time. And then, of course, there was that young fellow that managed to escape. That was a queer business. What, one of them got away, did he? Asked Arnold, wishing to break the silence that had again fallen on the circle. Oh. Yeah, I don't know how he managed it, but yes, sir. One of them contrived to creep out somehow or other. One evening, about tea time, I believe. Walked as quiet as you please up the road, took lodgings very close by here, in that row of old red brick houses that stood where the technical college is now. Well, I remember Mrs. Wilson, what kept the lodgings, telling my mother that she never saw a nicer, better spoken young man. Then there's Mr. Valence, that was his name, he called himself. It wasn't his real name, of course. He told her a story about him coming from Norwich and having to be very quiet on account of his studies, he said. He had a carpet bag in his hand. He said that his heavy luggage was coming later, paid a fortnight in advance. I mean, of course, the doctor's men were after him directly, making inquiries in all directions. But, well, Mrs. Wilson never thought for a moment that her young lodger was the missing madman. Not for some time, anyway. But she found out in the end, though, did she? Asked Arnold. I believe it was a week or so before she twigged that something was wrong. She was clearing away his tea one evening when he suddenly says, "What I like about these apartments of yours, Mrs. Wilson, is the amazing view that you have from the windows." We all of us know what there was to see from the windows of Rodman's Row. Fothergill Terrace, Chatham Street, Cannon's Park. Nice enough properties, perhaps, but nothing to write home about. So Mrs. Wilson, she didn't know how to take it. She thought it must be a joke. So she put down the tea tray and she looked him in the eye and she said, "What is it, sir, that you particularly admire, if I might ask?" "What do I admire?" he said. everything. And then it seems, you see, he began to talk nonsense about golden and purple flowers and the bubbling well and the walk that went under the trees into the wood and the fairy house on the hill. I don't know what else. He wanted Mrs. Wilson to come to the window and take a look at it all. Well, she got out of the room as quickly as she could. And that night, when she was going to bed, she passed his door and she heard him talking out loud. I mean, at first she couldn't make out what he was saying. He was jabbering in what sounded like sort of foreign language. And then he cried out, apparently, as if he were talking to a young lady and making use of very affectionate expressions. Well, I mean, that was too much for Mrs. Wilson. Next morning, directly after breakfast, she went round to a neighbour. She began to ask questions. And then, of course, it came out who the lodger must have been. And she sent word round to Himalaya House, and the doctor's men came and took the young fellow back. Oh, crap. Bless my soul, gentlemen. It's nearly 10 o'clock. Oh, the meeting broke up in a sort of cordial bustle. And Arnold, revolving many things, set out on the way back to London. I mean, much seemed heavily obscure, but he wondered whether Mrs. Wilson's lodger was a madman at all, any madder than Mr. Hampel or Perrott's cousin. Now, Arnold told the story of his researches at the next meeting of the three friends in Perrott's rooms. The scene had changed into a pleasant night in July, and the trees in the inn garden were fluttering in a cool breeze that wafted a vague odour of hayfields into the very heart of London. The liquor in their glasses now smelt of Gascony vineyards and herb gardens, and ice had been laid about it. And Harless's word all through Arnold's tale was, "I know every inch of that neighbourhood. I told you there was no such place." Perrott was judicial. He allowed that the history was a remarkable one. "You have 3 witnesses," Arnold pointed out. "True," said Perrott, "you do. But have you allowed for the marvellous operation of coincidence? I mean, there's a case, trivial enough perhaps, but it made a deep impression on me when I read it a few years ago. 40 years before, a man had bought a watch in Singapore. The watch went wrong, and he took it to a shop in Holborn to be seen to. The man who took it from him over the counter was the same man who'd sold him the watch in Singapore all those years before. You can never put coincidence out of court and dismiss it. Its possibilities are infinite." And then Arnold told the last broken, imperfect chapter of the story. "After that night in the King of Jamaica," he said, "I went home and thought it all over. Seemed to be nothing more to be done. Still, I felt I'd like to take another look at that park. So I went up there one dark afternoon. And then and there I came upon the young man who'd lost his way and had lost, as he said, the one who lived in the white house on the hill. Now, I'm not going to tell you about her or her house or her enchanted gardens, but I'm sure that that young man was lost also, and forever. I believe, you see, that there is a perichoresis, an interpenetration. It is possible indeed that we 3 are even now sitting among desolate rocks, by bitter streams. And with what companions? That's the end. Nunkie has rightly said perichoresis is a wonderful word. I think it means a dancing around, probably. I think it's a technical word. But there we are. It's not even really a story. I hope you weren't brought here under the false pretenses of expecting a story with a beginning, middle, and an end. It's more, I don't know, how do you describe it? But it's very effective, and I think there's a beautiful passages of writing in it. Yes, Nunkie is on fire. Nunkie said there's some question as to what the title N refers to. I mean, the most obvious thing is, and it must have been in his mind, was it refers to the postal district N for North London. But I don't know if anyone knows any other kind of N. I think it's deliberately mystifying. Extremely anti-Lovecraftian. Oh yeah, well, James Barrett, please feel free to expand on that. I suppose in its kind of yes, though, and Bill Booker's mentioned William Blake. I told him he couldn't come around today, but T.S. Eliphant asked me if he could read a William Blake poem as part of the evening. But I told him that, I told him to rest up tonight. An Enigma. Oh yeah, okay, yeah. Anne or North or Newington. Yeah. Yes. Oh, there. Okay. Yes, James Barrett. Yes, good point. It is kind of affirming of religious faith rather than dismissal, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a good story. N for infinite. Okay. Yeah. I don't know what N is. It's a chemical symbol of something. I'm not sure that could be relevant. I think Stephen King has written a story or a book called N, hasn't he? Which I don't know if that has anything to do with the story, but I think it is aware of the story. Oh yeah. Yes, ornaments in jade. I do. I have that. Nunkie. It sounds like you might be a member of the Friends of Arthur Machen. Oh yes, there we are. James Bond. Later. I didn't mention it below, but later in the month, at the end of the month, I'm going to be doing a reading of the Lovecraft's The Music of Eric Zan, which has some synergy, I think, with N, because it involves looking out of a window and seeing a remarkable, even more remarkable perhaps than that which Hampel saw. The fellow looks out of the window in Music of Eric Zan. And nitrogen, there we are. Does nitrogen have anything? Is it suggestive of nitrogen? I don't know. Was anyone disappointed by it? Did anyone not like it? I mean, do feel free to be to criticize it in some way. I mean, the thing is, I think it works very well out loud, but I think there's lots of interesting stuff to listen to. But I'm also aware that it's not a kind of a narrative thrill, really. I mean, I think the ending is brilliant and is rather chilling, but I can imagine as an audience member, it might leave you a little kind of shrugging your shoulders. Yeah, although Emma Reese has got the right idea. I should have said that. A drinking competition. Every time I drink, you're supposed to drink as well. Ah, N or M is used as a placeholder in the Book of Common Prayer. Oh, that's right. Eric, that's right. You came to see it in the pub, in the pub in just off the Strand. It was a great pub. The not Devonshire Arms, and it was one of the oldest pubs in the oldest parts of London, and it was near the Inns of Court, and it had been originally I think an 18th century coffee house, and they shut it down to turn it into flats. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I remember, Eric. I remember that evening well. Yeah, it was just before it shut. Ah, yes, it's going to be the Lowry in Salford. I think about the not Halloween itself. It's the week before Halloween. Um, yeah, this pub. It wasn't the Devon. What, Eric? Can you remember what it was called? Anyway, it was a really old, traditional pub. Um, Something Arms, named after some kind of old family. I think some nobleman who had some Elizabethan connection. And anyway, it had been a pub where it was a literary kind of pub just off the Strand, and not Arthur Machen so much, but G.K. Chesterton was known as a regular there, and they used to have on their kind of pub bookshelves, they have books that no one ever reads. They had the collection. They had lots of works by and about G.K. Chesterton, and the night I did a performance there, kind of a couple of days before it shut down, and they let me take a bin bag full of G.K. Chesterton books back with me, which I've still got, and I must admit haven't read much of. But oh, I did it at the Rugby Tavern as well. That's well, the Rugby Tavern, which is the place where hopefully I will go back to do some readings. They've got a great room upstairs, and that's in the heart of Bloomsbury. That's across the road, more or less, from where Arthur Machen lived for quite a long time. Joanne in Leicestershire, last night's performance, the music that was being played, it was folk songs sung by Alfred Deller, not Albert Deller, Alfred Deller. So John M. coming to Cheltenham. You see, that Lovecraft show, I don't think I'm actually going to, I don't think it's going to have, I don't think it has a future. It was what I was due to tour last May, when kind of everything was cancelled. But I'm not sure that I will go back to it. Whether I'll go to Cheltenham, with something else, perhaps. I'd forgotten that they'd booked me. I shall try. I'd like to. But yeah, Anne, you see, I think it was good. I've often thought of pairing it with The Door in the Wall by H.G. Wells, which again it has something in common with, this kind of access in suburban, unpromising London to a kind of paradise. Mark Humphrey, yes, I'll be coming to Suffolk in November, probably to Otley Hall, I hope. So yeah, I think it'd be a good evening. The Door in the Wall, followed by N, or vice versa. But as I say, I held up my copy of British Weird, and I've considered doing a show entitled British Weird with some of the, 2 or 3 of the best stories from that. Yeah, there's Mappa Mundi by Mary But. If you get hold of that, Mappa Mundi by Mary Butts, who it's rather like M, but it's set in Paris. It's rather like the music of Eric Zan, in fact, as well. It's a kind of about a place that kind of, well, it's about a guy who kind of disappears because he kind of gets, he finds a kind of otherness in the city. Cheers, Jeff. Oh yes, the Leeds Library. I'll be back there hopefully as well. I forgot to say that. Ah, there we are. June 25th. Wow, Thursday night. I remember it was a warm evening. We were drinking outside afterwards. Devereux, that's it, the Devereux. The Devereux Arm. Or it was just the Devereux, wasn't it? Well, Brian, with the ticket prices vary. When I do the M.R. James stories, it kind of, it depends. The theatre decides upon the ticket price. When I do readings in pubs, then I pass around a hat, and it really don't worry if it literally is pay what you can, and if what you can is, don't worry about it. Come along if ever. Where are you based, Brian? If you're in London, then come to the Rugby Tavern. Yeah, well, Brian, the Rugby Tavern in Bloomsbury, I mean, hopefully it'll start again, when we're all allowed to go out again. I do readings of miscellaneous stories. I no longer live anywhere near London, so it'll be less often than before, but I'm hoping to be there kind of maybe in July, and also in November. So look at the website, join the mailing list, follow the Facebook, and don't worry about ticket price and so on. It literally is, putting money in a hat. As are the ones that I'm doing online at the moment, like the Fen Stanton Witch. I mean, tonight this is just free to view, but the Fen Stanton Witch, you do need to register, and you're asked to make a donation, and an amount is suggested, but it really is only to save you the embarrassment of kind of wondering what's appropriate. Yeah, Canon Library tomorrow night. So it's going to be on Zoom. But of course, it's a great story. And I don't know, has anyone there been to Victor Wynn's Museum of Curiosities? It's in East London. Yeah, sorry, of course, it is a Phrygian bonnet. I've actually lost track of where it is over the last year. Because I tried to get some London-themed ale, and this is from the London Beer Factory. It's described as a session IPA. So let's see. Where did you take the kids, Adrian? Ah, yes. No. Okay, so Carol has said an event in Cambridge in November. In November, let me just check the dates. November in Cambridge, Friday the 26th and Saturday the 27th. What I'm planning to do is Oh, Victor Wind, yeah. What I'm planning to do on the 26th, 27th of November in Cambridge is perform the whole of M.R. James's Ghost Stories and Antiquary, which was his first collection of ghost stories, published in 1904. And I, over the years, have committed them all to memory. And so we'll perform them all 8 stories. So it'll basically be 4 shows, 2 a night, in the Leper Chapel in Cambridge, which is a great venue. Not great at that time of year because there's no heating, but well, actually there is some heating, but it's rudimentary. And yeah, so I'll be advertising that soon, and you'll be able to buy a ticket to experience the whole weekend, or you'll be able to buy individual tickets. What I'll do is I'll sell the grand ticket first of all to see how many people buy that, and then whatever's left I'll put as individual tickets for each individual show. So yeah, drop me an email if you're interested in that, or send me a message on Twitter. Well, yes, Hillary, in Scotland, I'll be performing M.R. James stories. It's generally when I tour around the country to theatres, because they're kind of more theatrically, they're more stagey kind of things with costume and set and committed to memory. I tend to do the M.R. James stories. Well, Lisa, Cat in a Cat Flap, this project to do the whole of Ghost Stories and Antiquary, I will do it in places other than Cambridge, but it'll be done in Cambridge first. So I think I'll probably do it in London. I want to do it in New York. Yeah. 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 Wrap up warm at the Leper Chapel. It's true. So yes, this project of doing them all over 2 nights, I will do elsewhere. I'll do it in the northwest, definitely at some point. Probably in Scotland at some point. Which venue in Edinburgh? I can't remember the date. The venue is the Arthur Conan Doyle Centre, which is a spiritualist centre in a magnificent kind of terraced mansion in the old part of Edinburgh. Yeah, the whole of Antiquary and the Lowry, I suspect they wouldn't go for that. I need to do this in places I booked myself. But there's a very good pub theatre in Salford that I would like to do. Yeah. I did a Facebook web chat. I kind of migrated from Facebook to here. This is the same, isn't it? I mean, seriously, ask me anything. This session IPA. It's one of those. It's like those American overly strong drinks. No, it's all citrusy. Ugh. Is anyone there interested in the TS Elephant T-shirt? I've been through hell with TS Elephant. I'll put up a picture of it on the Facebook page soon. It's cloudy, and yes, yeah, it is. It's a craft beer. Yeah. Yes, exactly. I've got some London Pride here as well, Andrew. Well, if you're interested in the TS Elephant T-shirt, of which I'll put, there's only one in the world that exists at the moment, which is my mum's. I bought it for my mum because she, and I think there were maybe 3 or 4 other people in the world who did this, tuned in to watch T.S. Eliot's Dante's Inferno live every day for 34 days. And then she had to watch it again with me afterwards. But anyway, well, she deserves it. Do you? Belsae Hall, I do. It was I found it a miserable place. Well, that's overly strongly put, but I found it a not pleasant place, Belsae Hall. Oh, FB, you interact with the other comments. Okay, yeah. Well, that would be more pub-like, wouldn't it? Yeah. 1698 is a nice but strong beer. 9 Ghosts by Richard Malden. Yeah, there's a couple of stories by him I've done. I think they're probably on the YouTube channel, or maybe I've only done them kind of as private things. But there's one called A Collector's Company, and there's one called Between Sunset and Moonrise, I think, which is very good. Has anyone got or read, or is anyone going to get British Weird? I do recommend it. Look at that cover. Look at that picture. That's from the John Buchan story, which is called, what's it called? No Man's Land. Not a very good title. The story is much better than the title suggests. Emma, that didn't occur to me. It's not Hierophant, but I could have done that. Good. Yeah, it really is. It's a really good collection and a very interesting introduction. No, I don't want the rest of that. But luckily, I got that. Thank you, Mark. Yes, Ghost and the Chit Chat, which was an anthology published by Swan River Press last Christmas and sold out very quickly. It's going to come out in paperback at some point, but also a sequel is being planned. Not Ghost of the Chit Chat, but it'll be ghost stories by other. It'll be Cambridge ghost stories, basically. So people who knew or were friends with or were contemporary with M.R. James, who also wrote ghost stories. I think it'll be quite interesting. It'll have Richard Malden, for instance, E.G. Swain. Yeah. Oh, well, Nikki, you didn't do badly. You've only got 7 more to catch up with. Cheerio, CJ. Thank you very much. So, is anyone... Monday, my end of lockdown, my stage 2 of the roadmap is going to be to get a haircut. Oh yes, so how long does it take to, well, yeah, Toffee Cavendish, thank you. Yes, it's I can't tell you exactly how long. a long time, I divide them up into bite-sized chunks, so kind of, a couple of months to kind of, taking it leisurely. Yes, the crow behind. Yes, it is. It was bought from. My mum bought it from Wilko around Halloween, and it made an appearance when T.S. Eliphant, he did a performance of Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven, which you can find on there. It's worth looking at. He's a great talent, is T.S. Eliphant. Oh yeah. Oh, the post Jamesian stuff that they've discussed on Podcast of the Curious. Yeah, I mean, worth looking at. Yeah, I mean, some things are better than others, but and in this book I did, Ghost of the Chit Chat. They're not. You're not being presented with the greatest stories that you'll read. You're being presented with stories by interesting people. If you're interested in M.R. James, so that's kind of the thing. So it's probably a bit disappointing if you're after a kind of best ghost story collection. You won't get that, but you'll get kind of background to the context in which M.R. James's stories were written. Yes, Emma. Yes, I'm sufficiently self-employed to have got the self-employment support. Mark, yes, Reggie Oliver. Yeah, well, I mean, the reason I don't do kind of more modern things generally is because of royalty issues, copyright issues, and so on. However, I know Reggie Oliver sufficiently well that I suspect he would probably. I don't know. I've not asked him, but I have considered it and might do it at some point. Yeah, no, Wilco's Halloween merchandise was really killer bee this last year. Has the crow got a name? I think he has, actually. I think he's called Nevermore. I think my mum has refers to him as Nevermore for obvious reasons. Look at that. Yeah, and it tastes like grapefruit. It's horrible. Nevermore. Yeah. Nevermore. Nevermore is an excellent jest. Yeah. Thank you, Brian. Oh, cloth. Okay. Oh, the house. Yes. Well, I live in the house in which I spent my teenage years at the moment, and it's a Victorian house on the outskirts, kind of in a suburb of Southport. So it's yeah. And my parents have always favoured the Victorian aesthetic in keeping with the house in which I live. So yeah. But these curtains, which were referenced in the story, I was very pleased by that. They've been a brilliant backdrop all throughout the kind of the online season. Yeah, drunky Nunkie. The wallpaper in the yeah, no, it is it is that. So the house is kind of I think it was built in 1888, so it's exactly contemporary with the kind of stories I like reading. I have got a bust of Pallas. I was given for my 50th birthday, which was my most recent birthday. I was given a pallid bust of Pallas. Yeah, it is. It's a lovely chair. Yeah, Frank, it is. It's in the room next door. Yes, pre-performance rituals. Yes, I do. Yeah, I kind of go through certain vocal exercise. Yeah, I do, but they'd be embarrassing to kind of and probably counterproductive to describe now. That leather chair that I've done the live performances in, I used to take that on the road with me. But it's it's a genuinely that was a chair my grandfather had. It's a very, very old chair, and quite a authentic antique. And I'm afraid it used to get rather bruised in the back of the car, so I've kind of stopped. A less valuable chair. Yeah, Jenny Newton music. It is a little lively. The problem is I don't have any control over it. I bought a really good camera for that reason, which I could control the focus. But the problem I had with that was that it was beyond me and beyond my advisors to get the camera to sync with the audio. So I decided that the lesser of two evils was the flipping in and out of focus, rather than kind of constantly be looking like I was dubbed. Yeah, but you're right. If I'd love to find a solution to it. The Conan Doyle Centre is a singular place. Yeah, they're very friendly people, and the room was very good. But they have a kind of it's a spiritualist centre, so there's a, not sure what they call it, a church or a temple downstairs, in which the dead are kind of invited to speak. So yeah, a strange place, but it's in a magnificent, as I say, this terraced house, but it's a mansion inside with a kind of dome right at the top, an extraordinary staircase. And I think it was built by one of the great Edinburgh brewers would it be McEwan's or something like that? Something like McEwan's or Tennant's, or what, one of the great Scottish brewing dynasties built this house, and then the Conan Doyle left so much money to the spiritualist church that they kind of took it over. Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting when the theatres reopen. I can't help it, even though bookings are being taken and programs are being written. No one's quite sure, and no one's quite sure how many people will be allowed into a theatre. So it may be a bit of a damp autumn, but we'll see. At least people are being optimistic at the moment. Will I carry on doing this? Yeah. We'll see. Depends how much hunger there is for it, how much appetite. God, there's still 49 people. This is good. But yes, no, Jenny, I would love to solve this problem of the. And also, this camera is very bad in low light. It doesn't allow you to. The lower the light, the more frantic the kind of auto focus is. Conan Doyle's weird stories. Yeah, well, that's another idea I've had for a show. Is the horror of the heights and the Blue John Gap, the terror of the Blue John Gap, kind of horror from above and terror down below. I've thought of doing that as a combination. Problem is the horror of the heights. I don't know. Does anyone have strong feelings about the horror of the heights? Oh, Gungshi. Sorry, I thought you were in Oxford. Where are you? It's 4:38 a.m. Where is it 4:38 a.m.? Well, maybe Gungshi's a clue. It's in Taiwan. Blimey. Oh, well, thank you for tuning in. Huh. Yeah, the horror of the heights. Did you know? It's on the YouTube behind closed doors program somewhere. Anyone got any feelings about the horror of the heights? Yeah, prefer the Blue John Gap. So do I. Now, the Piper at the Gates of Dawn. That's another idea I've got. I think the Blue John Gap could be made into a perfectly acceptable. I think that works as a kind of story. Horror of the Heights, I'm less certain about that. Oh yeah. Oh no, Jenny, I didn't think you were going to play. But it frustrates me. What I love is I bought this Canon camera, and it's a great camera, and at some point I'll learn to use it just as a camera. But I bought it as a live streaming kit, advertised as the best kit for live streaming, but it does not sync with the microphone. And Canon helpline were infuriating in their refusal to help me on this problem. Good. Yeah. So email me about the Cambridge thing. So we got Taiwan. Are any where else in the world are people at the moment? Are our American cousins still with us? Yeah. Matt Willing has just praised The Leather Funnel by Arthur Conan Doyle. It's a story of great grotesqueness and yeah, really, The Leather Funnel. Ah. Well, Emma, I'd be interested by. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, Ben. Yeah, I think maybe I would like to talk about the audio. I don't have a problem with. I've got a very good microphone, a blue Yeti microphone, which is very easy to use and has served me well. It's syncing it with the. Yeah. Yes. So my email address, if you go to the nunkie.co.uk/contact, you'll find my email address there. Yeah, it is horrific. Yeah. Lot 249 that's the one with the mummy, isn't it? And the the students. Yeah. Yeah, no, it is good. Yeah. No, it's good. Oh yeah, no, that's right. I think this probably will happen. I haven't put it up because I haven't decided, but on Friday, between now and the Fen Stanton Witch, I think next Friday I'll be doing a Sherlock Holmes story again. Charles Augustus Milverton. Oh yeah. So Jenny asked Jenny the walking tour that was um, the Ghost Writers on the Cam tour. Is that right? You see, that's kind of the subject of the next anthology from Swan River Press that I'm working on. But also, and I can't promise this, but I think that the weekend that I do all of the ghost stories and antiquary, the day after the Sunday, I'll probably lead that tour again, and it will be very cold. But yeah, ghost writers on the Cam. Yeah, I'm still pleased with that title. Yeah. Gary, yes, Gary, you advised me. Yes, I can't exactly remember what OP software solution was, but yeah, I have not overcome that difficulty. But thank you for your help, and I may get in touch with you again at some point. Yeah, so that's right. A week yesterday, I think I'll be doing Charles Augustus Milverton. It just Castaways on an Island and a Creeping Fungus. Ah, well, I look at it. Do I listen to watch any other performers? Well, um, I watched a good film last night, um, which was an improvised science fiction film um, called Coherence, and it's free on Amazon Prime. I thought it was pretty good. Um, I don't kind of watch. Well, I haven't kind of since last year been watching kind of other live performances. Really, I did what I did early on. I watched Frankenstein from the National Theatre with Benedict Cumberbatch as Dr. Frankenstein and the other fella's the monster. Oh, there we are. Glenn Carrig. Yes, Coherence is. It was an interesting film. Yeah, still kind of. The jury's still out a bit on how. No, but it was good. It was well done. I'm glad it was made. How do we find out about the Cambridge event? Well, it will eventually be kind of publicised widely. If you follow Facebook at the moment, that's the place where I kind of put up things like this. Also, Bridie, you can join my emailing list. If you go to nunkie.co.uk/contact, you can join up there. Ah, yeah. Yeah, William Hope Hodgson, you see, I reread recently and didn't enjoy at all the House at the Borderland. But I don't want to. Hmm. Yeah, it wasn't as odd. Well, yeah. No, I know that it's greatly admired by a lot of people who know about that kind of stuff. I just really did not enjoy it at all. Hey, Bridie. Hi. Yeah, yeah. Now, Nigel Neal, yes, again, I've kind of. I don't know. Where do you read it? Are they published in a collection, his stories? I, well, yeah, no, this may be something that I won't say yet, but a writer who an English writer who I admired greatly, kind of in my teenage years. I discovered today left behind unpublished supernatural tales, which I'm going to pursue. Do I do any other acting work? Dominic, no, not really. I kind of everything I do is stuff that I do for myself. However, in fact, I know. Well, again, I can maybe mention this. I am recording a. Oh no, I can't now yet because it's still early days. But there'll be a very interesting M.R. James product coming out. I think in the next few months. Yeah. Contact, is that the one with is it Amy Adams, where she's the linguist, and I loved that. Folks, what time is it? Oh, it's only time has been called at the Nunkie Arms. Thank you very much for coming. There will be more. Check out those links that I put in the description of the video. Oh, right, yes, that was a rifle. Yeah. Well, what's contact then? I enjoyed Arrival very much. Yeah. I suggest you do what I'm going to do, which is go to the kitchen, crack open a few eggs, make yourself an omelette,